it, and her support and his with her as well is just incredible. I met Ozzy Osbourne once, many years ago in the 90s, at a Kerrang Music Awards. I think he was there to receive a Godlike Genius of Metal award or something. And I got introduced to Sharon, who again, wasn't known at the time. I knew of her as his manager. And she took me by the hand, as any mother would do, and said, "Would you like to meet Ozzy?" I said, "Oh, yes, I would love to, please." And she took me to the table where they sat and sat me down. And I can't remember what I said to him. I was just in awe, but he was lovely. He was kind. And that smile, I just took away with me the memory of that smile. But that was Sharon all over. She looked after you. She looked after Ozzy, and my heart's with her today, definitely.
Yes, and she was saying, I saw an interview with her the other day, she was saying, she stuck with him through so many ups and downs, so many difficulties, obviously, the substance abuse, there's so many different problems that they had, because she felt that she was there to protect him. That's what she felt like her role was from whether it was being his manager initially, as his wife, but she just said that was her role as she saw it.
And I think if Ozzy wasn't the man he is, if he didn't have that kind heart, she knows what was behind the substance abuse, behind everything else that went wrong. She knew the real Ozzy underneath it. So she knew where he was, and she knew how to bring him back. And it took her a while, but she did it. And that's love. That's true love. And yeah, that's what mattered.
And the role of his children, his daughter, he did a single, didn't he, with his daughter?
Yes.
Got a #1 in the UK, didn't he, with her? Their lives are obviously sort of so intertwined, but they become individuals in their own right, of course. But it was so interesting to see somebody with such a crazy, chaotic life having this these deep relationships and this sort of almost normal but slightly crazy family life.
I know, and the children, of course, two of the children, Kelly and Jack, were part of the reality show. Amy chose not to be, and she is still a very private person, which is absolutely her right. But yeah, we were invited into their world, which was crazy, and the children were at times badly behaved, but aren't all children. And Ozzy was a fun dad, but you saw him being strict as well. And the children have gone on to be incredible parents, and also fiercely protective of their dad. They were there, of course, at Villa Park for the Back to the Beginning concert. I think I'm right in saying it was backstage where Kelly's fiance, well, now fiance, because he proposed to her. Again, that was so emotional. Backstage, I don't know if they'd just been on stage or just come on.
Yes.
But that's when he went down on one knee in front of Ozzy, who said, "You're not going to propose to my daughter." He said, "Well, he was actually."
Watch this. Yeah.
Oh no, the children are amazing.
Yeah. Oh, so lovely to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Claire Sturgis there, DJ Absolute, but obviously former host of the BBC Radio 1 Rock Show. And as we're talking, I can hear the chants of the crowds there gathered in Birmingham City Centre, waiting for the funeral cortege of Ozzy Osbourne to make its way through the streets of Birmingham to Black Sabbath Bench. So many people have gathered to pay their respects, so you can hear them shouting in the background here. You can probably hear them. Let's have a little listen in. So they're waiting to see the funeral cortege of Ozzy Osbourne, which is supposed to be leaving from Villa Park and making its way through Broad Street in the city centre. Then the family, we understand, are going to get out at Black Sabbath Bridge and come and have a look at all of those floral tributes, all of those messages that have been laid over the past 8 days. Let's bring in Ian Winwood, who's a music broadcaster, author of the book Bodies, Life and Death in Music, which is based in part on his experiences of interviewing Ozzy. Hello to you, Ian. It's a sombre, it's a sad day, but it's also, you can feel it in the crowd when you hear them chanting. It is a day for celebrating his life, isn't it, and his legacy.
Hello, Lucy. It's a pleasure to be with you. Just before I came on the line, I flicked on the BBC News channel, and I don't know what I expected to see. I expected to see some crowds, obviously, but you can kind of even, I'm speaking to you from London, and it's almost as if the energy and the sense of occasion has permeated, you know, from the second city to the capital. And listening to, you know, as I've been waiting on the line, listening to the previous contributors, Claire Sturgis in particular, uh, speaking and delivering encomiums, it kind of feels like it's the funeral for a monarch or a much revered head of state. It's very difficult, I think, to imagine someone from the world of music, Mick Jagger, maybe Keith Richards, Paul McCartney, certainly. But other than that, it's difficult to imagine the passing of a rock and roll singer, a hard rock and metal singer, who was so famous that he's the only person that the genre has produced that is recognizable by a mononym, is recognizable only by his first name. No one else in the history of the movement has achieved that feat. Ozzy is rather an unusual name, I grant you. And it's just a walloping sense of occasion. Yeah, you'd have to be willful to try and deny that.
Is moving. It's been in Aston, which of course is where Ozzy grew up, obviously where his childhood home was. It's going to then move through the city centre and come, as I was saying, through Broad Street, and then it's going to stop, and the family are going to get out at Black Sabbath Bridge, and they're going to come and have a look at all of those floral tributes, and that's where so many people have gathered. Let's just talk in about why all these people are here, as in why Ozzy Osbourne is such a big name, why he had such an influence on so many different genres, as we was talking about with Claire, not just, you know, rock, but, you know, such a massive influence, maybe trying to make people more edgy, whatever it is that they did. The influence was wide, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do wonder, Lucy, if this is as, I mean, you're absolutely correct. Not only was he part of a band that created an entire genre of music, that statement's hardly news. It's been repeated so many times this past week. But less, I mean, how many people get to say that? Less obvious, I think, is that his first solo album, Blizzard of Oz, which featured the talents of a young guitar wizard by the name of Randy Rhoads, his guitar technique kind of kick-started the American wave of hard rock and poppier metal, the results of which I would politely say were mixed. The legacy was mixed, but nonetheless. So he sort of played two major parts. First of all, he invented the genre, created the genre, and second of all, he helped kick-started a brand new decade when they sort of blued it out. Having said that, I think that part of this gathering that we're seeing today, the size of the gathering, is as much to do with his personality.
Yeah, and you know, I'm just gonna interrupt you just for a second so that we can listen in. This is the local musicians, this is Boston Brass, and they're accompanying the procession, and we can see the start of that procession now coming along Broad Street there. Let's just have a little listen in to them. Yeah, Ian, as we see purple flowers, the name Ozzy in flowers next to the coffin as it's going through the streets. People are cheering and clapping, making rock signs, holding up their cameras just to mark this moment, capture this moment, throwing some flowers at the hearse as it goes past. People clapping there, you can see in the centre of Birmingham. It's left Villa Park, the scene of that huge gig just a few weeks ago, which was billed sadly as a farewell gig, although nobody knew, of course, what was to come. But that was the Villa Park it started off at. We've seen it go through Aston, which was where Ozzy Osbourne's childhood home was, and it's making its way to Black Sabbath Bridge, where so many floral tributes await, and we understand the family's going to get out and look at them. You talk about, Ian, you talk about your experiences of interviewing Ozzy in the book. Talk to us about not perhaps the showman, but what he was like when he wasn't on stage, when he wasn't in front of a camera. Did he let his guard down with you, do you think?
Not to lower the tone, Lucy, but when I spoke to him, I actually didn't find him on very good form, which was a shame. I had interviewed him previously in person, and he was great. But one thing happened when I interviewed him. This was 2011, and it was at his the Osbournes' home that they had just outside of Amersham in Buckinghamshire, in rural Buckinghamshire. And we were it was a beautiful spring day, sunny spring day, when we were sat on garden furniture. And he'd sort of let slip that despite having a brush with sobriety at the time, he said he retained the ability to be able to score drugs anywhere in the world inside of 15 minutes. And I remember looking out at the undulating fields that abutted the garden, filled with grazing sheep, this perfectly bucolic scene, and rather certainly and flippantly I said, yeah, I bet you can't round here. And with a surety of purpose that I honestly will remember for the rest of my life, he turned his head and looked me straight and hard in the eye and said, how much do you want to bet? And I thought, do you know what? Not very much, Ozzy.
His honesty was a huge part of who he was. So open, wasn't he? So very much sort of, this is who I am. I'm not going to pretend to be anything else. We are, that charisma, that sort of chaotic life, but that huge personality is what has drawn so many people to him over the years, and has brought so many people, as we can see today in Birmingham, brought them to the streets to come and see this very public sort of moment of appreciation for him. People have been throwing flowers at the hearse as it goes past. People are cheering, they're shouting Ozzy, 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 and clapping. You can see that they are responding to that call that he made before he died a long while ago, saying that he didn't want his funeral to be a mope fest. He wanted it to be a celebration. Let's listen. Ozzy Osbourne's family there, taking a moment to come and look at those floral tributes. His wife, Sharon, they're looking to the crowd. They've been shouting her name, saying, "We love you, Sharon." Been chanting Ozzy's name, Ozzy, 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 as the hearse arrived there with her daughter and her son, having a look at all of those huge number of tributes that have been laid there over the past 8 days. People getting their phones out to capture the moment, but a lovely moment for the fans, I suppose, for them to see the cortege stop here and recognise the fact that they've all been there to pay their tributes. So many thousands of people in the centre of Birmingham today to pay their respects. Just seeing the Lord Mayor of Birmingham standing in front of the tributes as well. You're watching BBC News and our coverage as the city of Birmingham pays tribute to Ozzy Osbourne, the Black Sabbath frontman who died last week at the age of 76. We're just seeing the funeral cortege there, which has stopped on Black Sabbath Bridge, at Black Sabbath Bench, and the family we've just seen Ozzy's wife Sharon and his children get out of the car, along with other relatives and friends in the funeral procession, get out of the cars and go over to the flowers and read some of the messages, and they were greeted by the Lord Mayor, taking a moment to reflect on the huge amount of support that there is there in Birmingham today and has been over the past few days for the family. People were chanting Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy as the hearse pulled up and stopped in front of them. They've been shouting at Sharon, telling them they love her. The family, obviously, a hugely difficult day for them, hugely difficult, but even so, they're taking the time to come out and pay their own tribute, really, to the fans who are so keen to be a part of today. This is the public moment of the day. This is the public moment where the cortege is coming through the centre, but the funeral itself is going to be a private affair. Let's bring in Claire Sturgis, the DJ, former host of the BBC Radio 1 Rock Show. And Claire, as we were saying, it's such a hard day for the family, such a hard day for the fans as well, but lovely that the family has taken this moment to share it with them.
Absolutely. That was tough to watch, I won't lie. I just want to pick up the family in my arms and hug them. But it was something they needed to do, they wanted to do, and it was so lovely to see them there, that they wanted to come and share the moment, see that beautiful signs, all the letters, all the tributes, the beautiful flowers. It was important for them to see that and be part of that. And wonderful for the fans as well. Just looking at the fans as well, what really strikes me is the age range.
Yes.
All ages, from young to old.
But there will be some there who only know Ozzy Osbourne from reality TV, won't there? I mean, there'll be some that may not be too bothered about him being the pioneer of heavy metal. They know him as this crazy dad that had this life on TV.
They know him as one of Birmingham's finest. They know him as one of their own, who was a star on the telly, being funny on the Osbournes. But yeah, it goes back so much further. You can see, a lot of older people there who have brought their children and their grandchildren, and the emotion is. I know Ozzy didn't want us moping around, but I certainly shed a tear. I won't lie. It's heartbreaking. But I'm very mindful. I do want to celebrate Ozzy as well. But seeing the family there, that caught me.
Well, that's what he wanted. He wanted a celebration, didn't he? He said he didn't want a mope fest. He wanted a celebration. Yes. He's also talked in the past about, how he didn't really expect to live this long, did he? He's had, hard times. He had a quad bike accident when his heart stopped and the like.
Yes.
A life well lived, you could say. Let's just have a listen, because the cortege is just moving away from Black Sabbath Bridge. Let's just listen into the cheers. Just seeing the police outriders making their way through the streets of Birmingham. So many people holding flowers that they want to throw at the procession. And we were seeing earlier the Boston Brass Band leading that procession. Really huge numbers of people have turned out in Birmingham today to pay their respects to one of their own. Claire, let's just talk more, if we can, about the legacy, the musical legacy. And as we were saying, how there was no heavy metal before Black Sabbath, before 1970. How big an impact, as a DJ yourself, how big an impact has Black Sabbath had on the music world itself?
It's almost impossible to understand how they created this and how there was nothing like it before. Of course, it was before our time, but it just didn't exist before Ozzy and Black Sabbath came along. And I still find that, wow, what if we had something like that happening today? You just can't imagine what that would feel like. So yeah, for people who lived through it, people who discovered Black Sabbath in the late 60s, this is going to be a monumental occasion for them, because this has been their life. Ozzy has always been there for us, who's always existed. Black Sabbath has always been there, but the fans right at the beginning, there was nothing, and then there was Ozzy and Black Sabbath. So yeah, I think we can't get away from how important that was to fans. And again, we go back to the city of Birmingham, because before then, you know, proudly, life was hard, sometimes bleak, and out of that came this hard, bleak, horror-tinged music that changed the lives of so many. Really, I think that's the thing, it changed people's lives. Hearing this sound that you'd never heard before, that actually might have been quite, I don't think I like that, that's quite scary, but once you heard what they were singing and the chord progressions, everything about the music was just mind-blowing. And yeah, there was no heavy metal, and then there was Black Sabbath, and I think that is just incredible. And again, just looking at this procession here, just looking at the cortege, it's just, I wish I was there for a start. I think Ozzy would have loved this, and I wondered, again, as you said, he didn't really think he would make it this long after, you know, the life he had led. But he always said that music saved him. Music was his life. Music kept him going. If it wasn't for music, you know, there'd be nothing. So all this and seeing the band leading the procession, he would love this. Absolutely love it.
You were talking about the way that people sort of felt like they needed it. You know, these guys, he called them, you know, the four local lads. They were of the people. They were genuinely, you know, doing music for people, you know, around them, for their sort of people. It wasn't some constructed band. I mean, it was in a way, in the sense that he looked for other bandmates, didn't he? It wasn't like they were just brothers or friends that got together, but it was like they were representing the people they were playing the music for.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, they were from the same area, and they very much came together, like-minded spirits, and then that sort of spread out. You know, we had Led Zeppelin as well, who also had Birmingham connections, Judas Priest, and then you go on to Deep Purple, and then this whole genre was born. And from it, I mean, I dread to think what would have happened if we didn't have them. What would we be doing if there was no Ozzy and Black Sabbath? That's what I worry about. Luckily, this is what he's given us, a whole legacy, a whole lifetime of incredible music, and from Black Sabbath came so much more, and will continue. You know, his influence doesn't stop today. That influence.
Yeah, we'll just leave it there for a minute. We've got to take a little pause, but thank you so much for your contribution today to talking to us. It's been a real privilege. Claire Sturgis, DJ, former host of the BBC Radio 1 rock show. These are the images of Birmingham paying its respects to Ozzy Osbourne. You're watching BBC News. We're following that cortege as it's making its way through Birmingham city centre. It started off at Villa Park, made its way through Aston, that Ozzy Osbourne lived when he was a child, and then it's made its way through Broad Street and through to the Black Sabbath Bridge, the Black Sabbath bench there, where so many flowers and tributes have been left. And we saw the family, the wife, Sharon Osbourne, and Kelly and Jack, his daughter, and his son, take a moment to get out the car along with the other friends and family that were in that funeral procession. They got out at the bridge to take a moment to look at all of those tributes, And our reporter, Mark Savage, is on that bridge and was there for that moment. Such a moving moment, wasn't it, Mark, where the family wanted to show their respects to the fans who've made all of this effort and shown such warmth to Ozzy over the past week or so.
Absolutely. It was incredibly touching. I think one of the things that I noticed standing here is that all of the fans who'd been filming the cortege as it approached on their phones lowered them and just joined together in that huge chant of Ozzy, supporting the family as they went and read those tributes and laid some tributes of their own at the memorial that has now taken shape over the last week at the Black Sabbath bench. It wasn't quiet by any stretch of the imagination, but that isn't what Ozzy would have wanted. Before he died, he said he didn't care what happened at his funeral as long as it wasn't depressing. And I really did get the feeling that this was a moment where everybody was there to support the family, to buoy them up at this incredibly somber and emotional time. And it felt like a really fitting send-off for someone who lived their life to the fullest.
Thank you so much, Mark Savage, for us there on Black Sabbath Bridge. Let's see if we can bring in Adrian Goldberg, a music broadcaster and journalist, and Brummy himself. Hello to you, Adrian. A fitting send-off, Mark is saying. He didn't want a moat fest, Ozzy, did he?
Absolutely not. I'm only sorry I can't be there. It's the summer holidays and I've got childcare commitments today, but I would have loved to have been there. And it's wonderful for Birmingham. I know it's a sad occasion. Of course, it's the death of a man, a legend in Ozzy Osbourne, but it is also a great moment for Brummies like myself to celebrate his brilliant life and to celebrate heavy metal music, which has gone from Birmingham all around the world. You know, this is not just a UK phenomenon, it is a global phenomenon. Massive bands in the United States who were obviously influenced by Black Sabbath. The recent concert at Villa Park, you've got these bands like Anthrax and Metallica. You've got Tom Morello, who curated it from Rage Against the Machine. You've got a whole massive heavy metal scene in Brazil, for example. So I think it's just a moment for Birmingham to reflect. It's a place, Birmingham and the West Midlands is a place where we tend to be quite self-deprecating, quite down on ourselves, and don't perhaps quite appreciate what we've got. But I think that Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne in particular have given the world a genre of music, and it's not many places that can say that. And as you've been reflecting, what a fantastic character. That farewell gig at Villa Park just a few weeks ago, 40,000 people in. Ticket prices were enormous, and there were a few complaints about that. It wasn't a cheap gig, but look at where the money went. It went to places like Birmingham Children's Hospital. It went to places like Acorns Children's Hospice in Birmingham. And Ozzy Osbourne, and to be fair, the rest of his band, rather than trousering that money themselves, decided to give something back to the community that they came from. And I think that is a real tribute and a lasting legacy, as well as the music, that Ozzy Osbourne is going to leave behind.
And how lovely that so many fans got that just a few weeks ago. I mean, nobody knew that it was going to be, so soon afterward that he passed away. But it was billed as a farewell gig, wasn't it? But so amazing that so many people got that chance. They travelled from all over the world, so many of them, didn't they, to come and see it. To have that chance to sort of be there as they were so very recently. They must feel very privileged.
Yeah, well, it was a brilliant event, and as you say, it touched people all around the world. People travelled from far and wide. I was in London on Saturday as it happened, and came across people who had been or were going to an Oasis concert, but there were also a lot of people who were going down to London in tribute to Ozzy Osbourne, albeit attending an Oasis concert, wearing their Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath gear, just to reflect the fact that, Oasis, a great British band of their kind, but also wanting to go down and say, don't forget Ozzy, because Ozzy was a great person. And it's really interesting when we talk about the different phases of his career. Clearly, he became a soap star, reality show star, rather, a celebrity for the TV show The Osbournes, and a bit of a comic character, I suppose it's fair to say, as a result of The Osbournes. But if you listen to the power of the music, on my radio show, I do a music show on a station called Brum Radio in Birmingham. I played all 8 minutes of the track War Pigs the other day. Not a track that is generally played on the radio. And if Black Sabbath are played on mainstream radio, it tends to be Paranoid, which is a great song. But listen to the power, both the musical power and the lyrical power of a song like War Pigs. That was released in 1970, 55 years ago. It is astonishing to think that it can still be played today and still have that incredible resonance and that power and that relevance as well.
Yeah, we're just looking at the moment. They've just allowed the fans to walk out away from the barriers that they were being held behind when the cortege was passing, and they're letting the fans go and have a look at all of the floral tributes themselves, and everyone's rushing to take pictures and have a look themselves. We can also show you the moment that the cortege stopped. This is the moment where the hearse stopped at the Black Sabbath Bridge, and the family got out. As we were saying, Sharon Osbourne, his wife, there with her 2 children, leading the way, wanting to share the moment with the fans. She wanted to involve them in the day. It's going to be a private funeral later on, but they wanted to be a part of this with the fans, and they came over to have a look at all of those many tributes, and Sharon there laying her own floral tribute, and others there putting their floral tributes down among all the others that have been laid over the past 8 days. That sign in the background on the billboard saying Birmingham will always love you, with a picture of Ozzy Osbourne and a huge grin in the background there as his family take a look at those floral tributes before they got back in to the procession cars. And this is the scene now as they've cleared away, they've opened up the barriers so that the fans themselves can go and take a look and stand at what has become really a shrine to Ozzy Osbourne, that Black Sabbath bench on Black Sabbath Bridge, which has become this real focal point over the last few days. And Adrian, it's not just here in that area of Birmingham, is it? There's pointers to Ozzy Osbourne throughout the city, aren't there? I mean, you walk around and you really do feel it, haven't you? You've got the Ozzy the Bull at New Street Station, haven't you? You've got the Black Sabbath mural, haven't you, on Navigation Street? And then there's the Crown Pub. Do you know about the Crown Pub? Want to talk to us about that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I think one of the things that I hope can come from Ozzy's death and from the recognition now of the legacy of Black Sabbath is that venues like the Crown Pub, which is where Black Sabbath in their pre-Sabbath days, when they were a band called Earth, used to play, and they used to play in this magnificent pub which is on Station Street. If anybody's passing through Birmingham New Street Station, they can just pop out one of the exits and look at this brilliant 19th century pub, and it's part of a beautiful row of buildings in Birmingham, which includes a really old cinema, what was Britain's oldest working cinema for a time, the Electric Cinema. And unfortunately, much of that run now has been bought up in the case of the Crown Pub, where Ozzy started out. That is now owned, I think, by Japanese investors who show no interest whatsoever in developing the pub. It's simply boarded up, and it could be a great venue for live music. As I say, it's a fantastic location right next to New Street Station, and there is a local campaign to try and pressure the property owner there to bring it back into use. I think there are real concerns, and I'm sure people who are familiar with city centres around the country will recognise this, that at some point the Crown Pub will be allowed to fall into some kind of disrepair, that might then give the owners the excuse to demolish it, and it might then be replaced by an anonymous bland block of flats. Now, obviously, people have got to have somewhere to live, but there are no shortage of bland apartment blocks in Birmingham. But how great it would be if the Crown Pub, which not only hosted Osbourne and the rest of Black Sabbath in their early days, but was also the scene of a very important punk scene in the early 80s as well, some of which grew out of the heavy metal legacy. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that could be brought back into use, become a home for new and emerging bands in Birmingham and the West Midlands, so that there was this physical legacy in the city centre? As you say, Black Sabbath and Ozzy are commemorated in murals all around the place, but wouldn't it be lovely if the Crown pub where Ozzy started out were brought back into use and became a home for new and emerging music, and maybe touring bands as well, because music's in us. People might not think of Birmingham as a musical city. It's a hugely musical city, and I think it'd be great to have this focal point as a home, a legacy for Ozzy Osbourne.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Proud Brummie, Adrian Goldberg there, music broadcaster and journalist, of course, as well. Thank you very much for your time. Let's go straight over to Mark Savage, who is in amongst the crowd there, right in the centre of it all. Mark, talk us through what's going on.
Well, as you can see, now that the funeral cortege has passed, all of the crash barriers have come down and the fans are flooding over to the Ozzy Osbourne Memorial that has built up over the last 8 days here at the Black Sabbath Bridge and the Black Sabbath Bench. A lot of them who we spoke to earlier had brought bouquets of black roses and other things that they wanted to leave at that bench in order to pay their last respects to Ozzy. Some of those messages were read by Sharon and Kelly and Jack and all of the kids and grandkids when they stopped by here not so long ago. It's a bit of a sombre atmosphere now, but as you can hear, the chants of Ozzy's name are still ringing out everywhere. He would have loved this. This was all about... Oh, I'm getting a rose as well. Thank you very much. There you go. I should wear it behind my ear. But this is what Ozzy would have wanted, a celebration of his life rather than a mourning of his death. He said before he died that if his obituary only said he lived, he died, he bit the head off a bat, he would be happy. And he said that he didn't even care what music was played at his funeral. He said it could be Susan Boyle and Justin Bieber as long as it wasn't depressing. And today has not been depressing. It's been sombre at moments, it's been melancholy at times, but everybody's been here to support one another and to celebrate the legacy of someone who meant so much to metal music, to music fans, and to the city of Birmingham itself.
I love that he said that about Susan Boyle and Justin Bieber. That's brilliant. I love that you've been given a rose. Quite right too. It was very moving, wasn't it? I mean, as you say, you didn't want it to be depressing, but it was very moving to see Sharon and the family wanting to include the fans in this moment as well. And as you say, he would have loved this, and their life, their whole family life, was lived out on TV for everybody to see, so it's quite fitting, really, isn't it? I suppose that at the end of his life, they were wanting to involve the public and the cameras just for a bit anyway. We know that the ceremony itself, the funeral itself, is going to be private, but it felt like expected in a way, I suppose, that they might want to do something like this.
Absolutely, and of course, if you'd watched the Osbournes, the family that we saw here today were understandably not that kind of chaotic, argumentative, reality TV family that we all knew from MTV in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were very much still grieving. It's only been 8 days since Ozzy passed, and of course, nobody was expecting him to leave us so quickly after that final gig at Villa Park just 3 weeks ago, really. Although he was frail at that gig, he was still full of energy. He couldn't stand anymore because of the Parkinson's disease that had racked his body over the last 6 years. But he was still the wild-eyed, charismatic frontman, and although his voice faltered at times, it was still very strong. So I think there's still a bit of shock there, but they took in all of those messages, they acknowledged the fans, they turned around and waved at people before they got back into the funeral cortege and headed off towards the Ozzy mural that's come up in the last couple of days near Birmingham New Street Station. And then, as you say, we're expecting a private funeral to be held in Buckinghamshire tomorrow.
Only did know Ozzy through the reality TV sort of section of his life. Just explain why he is such a big deal, why there is this, such huge outpouring of love and devotion for him, and that why people wanted to come from all corners of the globe to go to Birmingham over the past 8 days or so to pay tribute to him. Just explain what it was about him and Black Sabbath that had such an impact.
Well, I think it's really easy to forget that before Black Sabbath, heavy metal music didn't really exist. I mean, maybe the Beatles could have said Helter Skelter was the first heavy metal song, and the Kinks had a claim to it with All Day and All of the Night. But what Ozzy and Black Sabbath did was they took the 12-bar blues and they put this kind of evil spin on it. The legend goes that they were in their rehearsal room one night practicing these jazzy blues numbers that were inspired by Fleetwood Mac, and they saw that there was a queue of people outside a nearby cinema waiting to see an all-night marathon of horror films, and they thought, well, if people are willing to stay up all night and spend all of their money on that, maybe they would be interested in horror music, and that's what they decided to do. They took inspiration from the occult and from satanic rituals and from medieval history. And Tommy Iommi, who's one of the greatest rock guitarists of all time, he tuned down his guitar partly in order to achieve that low growl that he was famous for, but also because he'd lost the tip of 2 fingers in an industrial accident before he joined the band, and so he actually had to have the guitar strings slightly looser so that they didn't hurt the tips of his fingers, which are very sensitive. But that music that they created on their first 2 albums, which both came out in 1970, was a revelation. It was heavy and it was dark, and Ozzy did an incredible thing vocally. Usually a blues singer would try and counterpoint what the guitar player was playing. They would come up with a melody that wove around the chords, but Ozzy quite often shadowed what Tony Iommi was playing. If you listen to the riff of Iron Man, the vocal line is exactly the same, and that made it feel heavier, more intense, and that music was new. It was revelatory. Critics hated it. They didn't understand it, but Franz really, really bought into it. Those first couple of albums sold millions of copies around the world, and they spoke to people who'd come from working class backgrounds, like all 4 of Black Sabbath had, and to people who'd been disenfranchised by the prog rock and the other things that were going around at the time. And so that music genuinely changed the world, and there are very few bands that can claim to have invented a whole genre. Everything that came afterwards can be traced back to Black Sabbath, and that's why at that final gig at Villa Park just a couple of weeks ago, you saw a who's who of rock and roll lining up to spend time with Ozzy on stage. You had Pantera, Slayer, Anthrax, Metallica, Guns N' Roses. It really was an incredible celebration of that legacy of music. And then, of course, there's that second act of Ozzy's career. After all of the hedonism and all of the bad behaviour of the 70s and 80s, where he revealed the softer side to himself, what he said was the true side to himself, the family man of the Osbournes reality TV show, who loved his kids, who loved his wife, who was exasperated by their behaviour, and particularly exasperated by the remote controls that he couldn't operate and the pet dogs that he couldn't control, but who was a kind of lovable family man, a patriarch. And that endeared him to a whole new generation of fans who discovered Black Sabbath's music through that show, and kind of guaranteed his longevity and gave that second act to his career. And that's why you saw so many generations of people here today all turning up to pay tribute to Ozzy.
Yeah, testament to his huge personality. What do you think was the reason that the critics didn't go for it in the beginning? Were they trying to overanalyze it or intellectualize it or something? What was it about the music you think that they didn't get, maybe?
I think on some levels it's quite basic. It is the frenetic drums of Bill Ward, those brain-splitting riffs from Tony Iommi, and then Ozzy screeching over the top. Coming out of an era of flower power and the summer of love, where the Beatles had been experimenting with tape loops and sitars, it probably felt quite elemental and out of step with what other people were doing, but sometimes you have to swim against the tide to make a change, and that's what Black Sabbath did.
Yeah, and the influence that they've had, and are still having, I suppose. Talk us through how you've seen it, the influence sort of spread out and continue to spread out, since.
I mean, if you look at those really heavy bluesy riffs that Black Sabbath pioneered and perfected in a lot of ways, without that you don't get bands like Motorhead, like AC/DC. You don't get death metal, you don't get black metal, you don't get Metallica. It all stems from there, because they were the ones that had the instinct to go heavier, to go darker. And, in some cases that maybe went ways that the band didn't like. They played around with the occult and satanic imagery, but if you read Ozzy Osbourne's autobiography, he was actually quite appalled by the Satanists that followed them around. There's a famous story that they would turn up outside the band's hotel room when they toured the US, and one night they arrived back, and outside his room there were 20 people in cloaks, all chanting satanic mantras with candles lit, and he sat down with them, blew the candles out and sang Happy Birthday, much to their disgust. He wasn't necessarily a fan of what he was proposing, you know, it was a fictional. He said, I'm not the Antichrist, I am a family man. And so the music did spin off into darker directions, but what they represented was a move towards heaviness, a move towards something that was elemental, that spawned generations of guitarists, inspired thousands of bands to form, and led us to a place where rock and metal really earned their place in the pantheon after the pop and rock explosion of the 60s.
We're seeing in central Birmingham today. Thank you so much, Mark Savage, there for us. Let's bring in Claire Sturgis again, former host of the BBC Radio 1's Rock Show. I want to talk to you about Sharon Osbourne, his wife, and her influence on, well, everything really, I suppose, from when they got together. Originally his manager and such a huge influence, you know, obviously on the family and in its role in that sort of the reality TV. But and as we do perhaps talk about her, Claire, we'll just show the images of her today where she took a moment to stop the procession. The cortege stopped on Black Sabbath Bridge, and the whole family, friends and family, grandchildren, children, got out to come and look at all of these tributes. And Claire, she has been such a massive part in sustaining him. She talked about wanting to protect Ozzy, didn't she? And that's why she stuck with him for so long through so many difficult times. She's, you know, undoubtedly had this major role in all of this, in his success that carried him through.
Yeah, Sharon Osbourne is a formidable woman, a manager, but primarily a mother. She was so, I think, intent on keeping the Osbourne family together. And as you say, without Sharon, none of this would have happened the past few years. Ozzy, I wouldn't say Ozzy was on a journey of self-destruction, but I think, you know, things, when things were bad, they were bad, but she never gave up on him. She knew what was underneath. She knew what an amazing man he was, what an amazing father he was and husband. So she hung on in there. She stuck with him. And I think she enabled him to continue with his career. As he said, without the music, he was nothing. The Back to the Beginning farewell concert that happened in Villa Park just a matter of weeks ago, incredibly, for Ozzy and the band to say a farewell to the fans around the world wouldn't have happened without Sharon Osbourne. None of that would have happened.
She was the one doing the publicity for it, wasn't she, at Villa Park beforehand, and people were sort of nervous, thinking, gosh, is he maybe not going to turn up, because it was her rather than him doing the publicity shots and posing for the cameras and stuff. But it was very much her just doing her bit, wasn't it, her normal bit.
And I think Ozzy, of course, you know, all Ozzy's energy and efforts were going to getting on that stage. That was the one thing Ozzy wanted to do. He wanted to be on that stage at Villa Park. That was his aim. Nothing else could distract him from being on that stage. That's why Sharon stepped up for all the publicity, along with Tony Iommi. But I think for the past few years, this has been announced, so I'm not breaking any embargoes. They have had a documentary film crew with them, led by BAFTA-winning director Tanya Alexander, who her and her husband Phil are very close friends with the Osbournes. They have been with them since 2022. Doing a documentary about Ozzy, about his health. I think he wanted to be very open and honest about Parkinson's. And the idea to have this farewell concert, they've been with them every step of the way. So we are going to see Sharon in action and how she made this happen. And it just makes me wonder how much we're going to see of this as well now. But so yeah, Sharon made this happen. Sharon made Ozzy what he is, you know, up until this point.
Huge support to him. Yeah,
absolutely. The whole family. The whole family.
Yeah, I mean, to reflect on his life, we were talking earlier about that quad bike accident that he had where his heart stopped, he nearly died. You know, he lived a crazy life, didn't he? He lived it to the full, I think you can say, but he, you know, he obviously had the substance abuse problems, didn't he? You know, really sort of so many issues for them as a family to have to deal with. But, you know, his honesty and the fact that they let the cameras in, I suppose, has all been part of that. And that honesty is so disarming, isn't it, to people? You know, it's so hard to sort of get any sort of, I don't know, traction when somebody is, you know, admitting to all their flaws right in front of you.
I mean, true grit. I mean, that man was unstoppable. Like you said, that quad bike accident was horrific and he got through it. He survived. He's lived with Parkinson's for many years. And I want to mention, in fact, the charities that the Back to the Beginning concert, the money that went for, I think it's about £140 million in the end. The two children's charities, but also Cure Parkinson's, which is a relatively small charity based in London. The money they will get from this will do great work in looking to cure Parkinson's, to support those with Parkinson's and family and friends associated. And yeah, Ozzy lived with Parkinson's for many years, and he just got on with it. And I think that says a lot about his determination. And again, going back to the music kept him going. Sharon's support kept him going. A phenomenal man.
Yeah, it's so surprising for me to hear that they were a sort of jazzy blues band in the beginning. You know, I just can't really get my head around that somehow. How does that transition?
They got to start somewhere. I don't know. So, I mean, you know, I mean, the blues, most rock bands, I think you trace most rock bands' influences, the Rolling Stones, for example, you know, they all go back to the blues.
But
you
jazzy,
know, the blues musicians,
you know, it's just so, jazz is so not Aussie, is it? You know?
Yeah, I know. But look at the musicianship, you know, the guitars, the rhythms. Yeah, you can see. I mean, I'm not a musicologist, but first there was the blues, and you know, that's where it all began. That's where heavy metal came from. But yeah, I can't imagine him and Tony, was it, in a blues band? That's brilliant. Yeah, love it.
I love also did you hear that Mark Savage was telling us that little anecdote about these sort of Satanists who turned up outside at one of their performances, and he just blew the candles out and sang happy birthday. I mean, you know, he courted this controversy, whether it was intentional or not, it was there, and you know, obviously played along with it. But then, you know, when something serious like that he felt uncomfortable with, he, you know, disarmed them. But, you know, I suppose you can't decide what kind of fans you get, can you?
No, you can't. Very, very true. But I think, again, it was all about the music for Ozzy and Black Sabbath, the imagery. They liked the gothic imagery, the horror sort of imagery that came associated with the band. But they didn't take that side seriously. It was about the music. And quite often when you saw Ozzy on stage, you know, there was an element of theatre. It was very theatrical, almost operatic in a way. But you could see by the look on his face, the smiles. You know, it wasn't to be taken seriously. Take the music seriously. Don't take the image too seriously. They
weren't trying to make any sort of point, were they? Or was it just about sort of having a bit of a laugh and doing something a bit different? They weren't trying to make any sort of deeper point?
I don't think so, no. It was all about trying to do something different, and also to get them, I think in the early days, to get themselves noticed, I would imagine. But yeah, taken.
Certainly did that. Certainly succeeded in getting noticed. There's something also, we were talking to Adrian Goldberg earlier, who, you know, very proud Brummie, was talking, you know, so proudly, and you've heard so many fans over the last few days as well, talking so proudly that, you know, he came from there and he's put, you know, Birmingham on the map by being this sort of creating a music genre, and how many cities can say that they're responsible for that. You know, there is so much pride, isn't there, in it, you know, and I suppose the fact that it is a bit edgy, it's not some sort of, you know, twee little sort of, I don't know, I'm not wanting to have a go at folk bands or anything, but, you know, it is this sort of heavy, edgy, you know, properly sort of almost, you know, controversial without necessarily just seeking it out. But there's so much pride in Birmingham, isn't there, of this?
And quite right too. I mean, Birmingham is a magnificent city. I remember when I started, you know, my rock radio career at Radio 1 on the Rock Show back in the early 90s, if I wanted to DJ at a rock club, I got on the train at Euston and went up to Birmingham. That's where I went to DJ the rock clubs, because that's, that's what Birmingham was famous for. But I think as well, if you think about the time that Black Sabbath was coming out of, it's very much sort of the 60s, the summer of love, hippies, flowers in your hair. And I think it was important to them to represent what Birmingham was, represent where they came from.
And working class Birmingham, yeah.
Yeah, the working class Birmingham, keeping it real, keeping it hard and heavy, and making a bit of a racket, which is what went down so well.
Which the critics didn't like, though. And there's always, I suppose, people like the music that critics don't like, don't they? They catch up eventually, the critics.
Absolutely. The fans loved it. The fans discovered it without the critics getting involved. And eventually, of course, the critics would come around to it. But yeah, that was the most important thing. The locals loved it. Birmingham loved it. Most of Birmingham loved it. And that's what was important, I think, to the band.
And then there was the solo career, wasn't there? Talk us through how that went.
Well, I mean, Ozzy sort of took that theatre, took that sound and did it himself. And got himself a band, and it kind of evolved the sound, but I think and then as far as the heritage is concerned, though, for me it was always about Black Sabbath and Ozzy. But Ozzy as a solo artist had a much longer career,
and also the duet with his daughter, didn't he?
And getting his daughter on. I mean, that the response to that at times wasn't very kind, but I thought it was beautiful. I don't think Kelly ever had any ambitions to be a singer. But if your dad, Ozzy Osbourne, asks you to be on a song, you're not going to say no, are you, really?
Get number one out of it. Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. And then there was the TV, the reality TV. I mean, it was so surprising, really, wasn't it, to people who'd followed him up until then. I mean, for people who didn't know him, I don't think they know really what hit them. But I think it was all part of this kind of this pioneer, I suppose. It's all part of this doing something different and taking risks. It could have gone horribly wrong for him, couldn't it? People may have watched him and thought it may be a bit gross seeing him in his pants watching telly and things like that, as you mentioned. It could have been very different, could have gone wrong.
I would have loved to have been in that first meeting with MTV or the production company saying, we've come up with an amazing idea. We're going to put cameras in the Osbourne household and just watch them living 24/7. I think we've got a hit on our hands. And I don't know whose idea that would have been, but just to see Ozzy struggling with the TV remote, chasing the cat around the house, moving boxes, doing what Sharon told him to do, very much the man of the house, but Sharon was the ruler of the house, and trying to children. I mean, it was the story of an everyday family, really. I mean, everyone could identify. He just happened to be a rock and roll star, a metal star.
Even the biggest heavy metalers among us have terrible difficulties with their kids, like the rest of us.
Well, that's just everyday life. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Oh, so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much, Claire, for being with us throughout the day today. It's been really lovely to talk to you. It's Claire Sturgis there, DJ for Absolute Radio, former host of the BBC Radio 1 rock show, joining us here on BBC News as we've been watching these scenes in Birmingham city centre. So many thousands of people have turned out to pay their respects to Ozzy Osbourne, 76-year-old frontman of Black Sabbath, who died last week. In amongst all of those fans there, what you can see is our reporter Mark Savage, who's been telling me what it's been like.
Well, as you can see, now that the funeral cortege has passed, all of the crash barriers have come down and the fans are flooding over to the Ozzy Osbourne Memorial that has built up over the last 8 days here at the Black Sabbath Bridge and the Black Sabbath bench. A lot of them who we spoke to earlier had brought bouquets of black roses and other things that they wanted to leave at that bench in order to pay their last respects to Ozzy. Some of those messages were read by Sharon and Kelly and Jack and all of the kids and grandkids when they stopped by here not so long ago. It's a bit of a sombre atmosphere now, but as you can hear, the chants of Ozzy's name are still ringing out everywhere. He would have loved this. This was all about... Oh, I'm getting a rose as well. Thank you very much. There you go. I should wear it behind my ear. But this is what Ozzy would have wanted, a celebration of his life rather than a mourning of his death. He said before he died that if his obituary only said he lived, he died, he bit the head off a bat, he would be happy. And he said that he didn't even care what music was played at his funeral. He said it could be Susan Boyle and Justin Bieber as long as it wasn't depressing. And today has not been depressing. It's been somber at moments, it's been melancholy at times, but everybody's been here to support one another and to celebrate the legacy of someone who meant so much to metal music, to music fans, and to the city of Birmingham itself.
I love that he said that about Susan Boyle and Justin Bieber. That's brilliant. I love that you've been given a rose. Quite right too. It was very moving, wasn't it? I mean, as you say, you didn't want it to be depressing, but it was very moving to see Sharon and the family wanting to include the fans in this moment as well. And as you say, he would have loved this, and their life, their whole family life, was lived out on TV for everybody to see, so it's quite fitting, really, isn't it? I suppose that at the end of his life, they were wanting to involve the public and the cameras just for a bit anyway. We know that the ceremony itself, the funeral itself, is going to be private, but it felt like expected in a way, I suppose, that they might want to do something like this.
Absolutely. And of course, if you'd watched the Osbournes, the family that we saw here today were understandably not that kind of chaotic, argumentative, reality TV family that we all knew from MTV in the late 90s and early 2000s. They were very much still grieving. It's only been 8 days since Ozzy passed, and of course, nobody was expecting him to leave us so quickly after that final gig at Villa Park just 3 weeks ago, really. Although he was frail at that gig, he was still full of energy. He couldn't stand anymore because of the Parkinson's disease that had racked his body over the last.
Sorry for the interruption there. That's Mark Savage, our music correspondent, right in the centre of things there in Birmingham on the Black Sabbath Bridge, which is where those fans now have been able to walk over to where the flowers are. They were standing behind the barriers when the funeral cortege came along and stopped, paused there, and the family of Ozzy Osbourne got out to go and lay their own floral tributes, but also to have a look at what has become a memorial to Ozzy Osbourne there in Birmingham city centre. We can speak to Alex Woodford, who was also there. Hello to you, Alex.
Hi, good afternoon.
So tell me where you were then, because we've been looking at these pictures of the bench and the bridge where the focal point has been today. Tell me where you were.
Well, I actually got down there really early this morning. I got there about 6:30, 7 o'clock this morning, so I was able to get.
Were you the first?
Front. Not the first, no, but I was quite early. I was one of the first, I would say, and I was directly opposite the bench and the bridge, central, so I had a really, really good view.
And just tell me, I mean, we were talking a lot earlier about how Ozzy Osbourne has previously said that he didn't want his funeral to be depressing, he didn't want a mope fest, and we were hearing as the cortege was going through the streets, we were hearing people chanting and clapping. How did it feel for you being there?
Oh, it was, I mean, obviously, I'd rather not have been at his funeral at all, but being there was very special. It was very sad, but it was also really nice. Weirdly, it's hard to describe, but everybody, there was chanting. People were